Welcome, everybody. It is Tuesday, June 25th, 2024. Welcome to episode 94 of the Old Mage MTG podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We've gathered here today to talk about some old frame Magic the Gathering, and we have a couple old frame Magic the Gathering topics for you. First, we're going to continue our serial series. This is the series in the podcast where we learn about old decks that were named after breakfast cereal, and then we talk to you about what we have learned. This is the second part. This is the second video in our serial series. First one was Fruity Pebbles and Cocoa Pebbles. That was just 2 episodes ago. Once we finish with segment 1, we're going to move on to the Old Mage Commander Corner, which as loyal listeners of the podcast know, is always the last segment of every episode of the Old Mage MTG podcast. But this week, we're going to do something a little bit different. So far in 2024, we've been using the Old Mage Commander Corner to build our 2024 Old Frame Commander decks. Last week, we each added the 100th card to our 2024 Old Frame Commander decks. Now we are in the playtesting phase. We're in the goldfishing phase, the playtesting phase. We're revising the deck. We're refining the deck. And probably a few weeks from now, when they're finely tuned, when they're sharpened blades, we're going to come back. We're going to tell you about the changes we've made to the deck. But in the meantime, we got some other topics. We're going to learn about other things in the world of Commander. I found a series of articles that was written by another YouTuber. He's the guy who runs the Nitzahone Magic YouTube channel. He also writes articles for Card Kingdom. And he wrote some articles on underappreciated cards in Commander from old sets. So we're going to talk about one of those articles today. But before we get on to the main topics, I'm going to say if you enjoy the podcast, you can support us by giving the video a like, subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, many other podcast apps too. Alex uses Ronnie's apps. It was developed by his buddy Ronnie. He might be the only person who uses it. But if you also listen to the podcast on Ronnie's app, subscribe to us there. I also want to mention, we just mentioned this for the first time last week, I made our Mox field public now. So you can join us. You can follow us on Moxfield. So if you want to find us on Moxfield, you can see all of the decks that we talk about on the podcast. I post all of the decks there because it's really nice to look through everything. I like how Moxfield's laid out. I like the visual grid. On Moxfield, we're not Old Mage MTG. We are Old Men Magic. That is our old name. So until I can figure out how to change my name on Moxfield, you can find us on Moxfield under Old Men Magic. Finally, if you're in the market for cardboard or cardboard accessories, I want to remind you, we do have a affiliate link for TCG Player. You can find that in the description of the video below. You just scroll down. You click on that link. When you go to buy your cardboard accessories, we get a little percentage of that. So that helps us. That helps us a lot. But now that that's out of the way, I'm going to move on to segment 1. Segment 1 of episode 94, Alex, is called The Origins of Trix. This is where we're going to talk about the Trix deck, the second serial deck in our serial series. Trix is a combo deck that made use of a largely unplayed bulk rare from Ice Age. It is a combo deck that can bring your opponent from 20 life down to 0 in a completely novel way. Trix is a combo deck that Mike Flores referred to as the single most devastating deck in the history of tournament Magic. That is a quote from his article titled Top 10 Extended Decks of All Time.
Wow.
Most importantly for this series of episodes that we're recording, it is a combo deck named after a breakfast cereal. That's why I'm talking about it today. So Trix made waves on the competitive Magic the Gathering scene in the extended format in the year 2000 to 2001. But it didn't do much after that. And I think that was mostly because some of the major components of the deck, not the 2 key cards in the combo, but the supporting cast was banned. not that long after. They banned it. They banned some of the supporting cast, very key cards in the deck from the extended format in like 2000. Well, some in 2000, some in 2001. So I'm going to start by talking about how the deck wins. Well, the deck wins by forcing your opponent to gain control of a card. That card is Illusions of Grandeur. It's a very unusual card. It's 3 colorless, 1 blue, enchantment with a cumulative upkeep of 2 colorless. When Illusions of Grandeur comes into play, you gain 20 life. When Illusions of Grandeur leaves play, you lose 20 life. Effects that prevent or redirect damage cannot be used to counter this loss of life. And actually, there is a gatherer. There's a gatherer update to the text. I forgot about that almost. I want to pull that up. What it says now is, when Illusions of Grandeur enters the battlefield, you gain 20 life. When Illusions of Grandeur leaves the battlefield, you lose 20 life. So
the difference just being that they entered the U in there, so that it's like telling the controller of the card that they're the one that loses the life. Is that the...
I think so. They also changed the language from comes into play to enters the battlefield.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Like I always knew, I guess, what comes into play meant. Really, but I guess enter the battlefield is a more standard way to phrase that. I'm trying to think of what cases it would matter. We've talked about phasing recently when we were discussing Mirage, the Mirage set, when phasing was introduced. Yeah, and from when I remember, when a card phases back in, like it comes back into play, but it doesn't enter the battlefield.
I think so.
Yeah, that's right. Or when it leaves play, also it leaves play, but it doesn't leave the battlefield. So there are some reasons or some cases where they would want to standardize that language. But those are the two differences I noticed. They changed comes into play to enters the battlefield, and then they added the U. This is a card that we first mentioned in episode 72 when we discussed the rares from Ice Age. It was a card that I said mostly sat around in everybody's cardboard boxes at the time it was printed. We didn't have much to do with it. There are obviously incredible benefits offered by the card, gain 20 life, but that all goes away when you can't pay the upkeep. And a cumulative upkeep of 2 is quite hard to play or to pay. So as soon as you can't pay that, everything disappears like an illusion, Alex. It's all an illusion. The 20 life you just gained wasn't even there. But the genius of Trix, the Trix deck, the way they used Illusion of Grandeur is they used the inability to sustain this cumulative upkeep, which is, was originally printed as a downside. They used that inability as a benefit. And they were able to use that inability to pay the cumulative upkeep as a benefit by playing this card with another card that allows you to give this permanent to your opponent. And that card is Donate. So this is the core of the deck. You play Illusions of Grandeur and you donate it to your opponent. This is a card that didn't exist back in the day when we played, Alex. We had no Donate. So we had Illusions of Grandeur and nothing to do with it.
And I remember some people trying to do 1 or 2 clever things with it, but I don't think it really had as much to do with trying to give it to your opponent as much as like figuring out a way to pay the upkeep for a while or yeah.
Yeah, that was the best thing you could do with it back then. Play it to gain 20 life to buy yourself maybe like 2 or 3 more turns to do other things while also finding some way to pay the cumulative upkeep.
Mm-hmm. You could turn that extra life into a resource somehow to give yourself, more mana to pay it longer or whatever. But yeah, Donate's definitely more on point.
So Donate is a rare from Urza's Destiny, 2 colors, 1 blue, sorcery. Target player gains control of target permanent you control. So you control the Illusions of Grandeur, you play Donate, you give it to target player. Donate is one of the cards that Mark Rosewater pointed to as one of his biggest design mistakes. From an article titled Mistakes, I've Made a Few, he had this to say about Donate. He said, now R&D has to constantly be on the lookout Donate's existence requires us to be more cautious on dangerous upkeeps. Is that trade-off worth it? Should the game have less dangerous upkeep cards so that Donate can stay in the environment? I think the answer is no. The former has a much greater area of design space. Thus, the mistake of Donate was that the existence of one card cut off an interesting design area capable of making numerous other cards. Now it's possible that the one card might be worth more than the combined cutoff design space, but with Donate, I believe this isn't so.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. My first thought when I saw Donate was kind of like I liked it because I thought this was a mechanic that was missing when we were younger, and it's a neat way to do what it does. It's a new way to do that. But I think his point makes sense. There are also other ways that are a little less direct to like swap permanents, maybe, and maybe that wouldn't be as disruptive of the idea of having bad upkeeps. But yeah, it's something to think about. It's definitely interesting. I think he makes a good point.
Yeah, I do too, because you could think about so many cards that you might want to be able, so many cards you could think of to design that would provide some sort of incredible benefit to the player, but then you want to give it a downside.
Yeah.
If the benefit's incredible, you have to steepen the downside. And with a card like Donate, you can only steepen that to a certain point. Otherwise, you get to the point where it just becomes, again, another deck that revolves around a 2-card combo. Donate in that card.
Yeah.
Donate in that card. Donate in that card. You're just going to have people repeating the Trix deck over and over again with Donate and card X or card Y or, whatever new card comes into the format. So, yeah, it's just something when they're designing new cards now, they have to think, okay, well, Donate exists. How's this card going to interact with Donate? How's that downside going to interact with Donate? So I get it.
I still don't hate the idea, like the mechanic of what Donate does. It makes I guess maybe they should have just like done something else with Donate, like given it a downside to
make it harder to do. Make it harder to do in some way, so it's not just
or like make it timed. Make it only work for 3 turns or something, or there's different ways they could have put a downside to Donate where it wouldn't have made such a great combo.
But that's it. That's the combo. 2 cards. I want to now look at some Trix decks that performed at the Grand Prix level in the year 2000. What did people run in the deck other than Illusions of Grandeur in Donate? So there were 2 Trix decks that were in the top 8 at Grand Prix Philadelphia in the year 2000. This is a Grand Prix that we looked at a little bit previously. The format was extended. The number 1 deck at Grand Prix Philadelphia 2000 was 3 Deuce by Trey Van Cleef. This is where we first saw some of the decks that were played at this tournament. The number 2 deck was a deck called Full On Trix by Scott McCord. And then tied for 5th to 8th place, we had another Trix deck, Necro Donate, aka Trix, piloted by William Jensen. The first deck I want to talk about is the one piloted by Scott McCord, and it's a deck just full of busted cards. So there was more that made this deck incredibly powerful than just Illusions of Grandeur and Donate.
My very first question was going to be, is Mana Vault around at this time and legal?
Yes.
Okay.
It is. So this is Full On Trix, an extended deck played by Scott McCord at GP Philadelphia 2000. There were 8 sorceries in the deck, 4 Donate, of course, and then 4 Duress.
Okay.
When you run black and you're running a combo deck, you often see discard because this helps you keep your combo intact. You got to fish out those counter spells. You got to fish out those disenchants. You got to fish out those naturalizes. Get rid of them. Get them out of the hand as soon as possible. 19 instants, 2 Brainstorm, 3 Vampiric Tutor, and 4 Demonic Consultation. So these are blue and black card draw spells or tutors. Cards you can use to fish for your combo pieces. And then you have 1 Contagion. This is your only piece of removal If you really need to clear some creatures off the board, you have Contagion. You have plenty of black cards to pitch to Contagion. And then you have 4 Dark Ritual for ramp along with the 4 Mana Vault, which, Alex, you wondered if Mana Vault was legal at this time. The answer is yes. Mana Vault was in all sorts of broken decks around this time, as we've seen, and we weren't playing Mana Vault.
Yeah.
We were just sitting there staring at Mana Vault and whining because we didn't have Moxes. The Mana Vaults were right there in our hands, in our boxes. We weren't playing them. Silly.
I also feel like amongst our friends, there weren't many Mana Vaults around.
No,
you know what I mean? Like I had one at one point, like I think I always only had like one Mana Vault. So I guess, maybe if some of us had different luck opening packs and one of us had ended up with a couple of them, we would have like played with it more. Either way, I don't know. Dumb.
I overlooked it. I was still in my phase of Magic where I was like, this does damage to me, so it's bad.
Yeah.
Anyways, 4 Dark Ritual along with 4 Mana Vault for ramp, which you need in any sort of combo deck if you want to pull off a quick combo to kill your opponent. And then you have 4 Force of Will to get your combo pieces through to stop their removal.
Just skip the Hoodwink.
In addition to that,
sorry,
you have 1 Hoodwink. This is a different card. This is a card from Mercadian Mass. This is a card that we don't see. If you're talking about a blue-black deck from this era, you're going to see Brainstorm. You're going to see Demonic Consultation, Dark Ritual, Vampiric Tutor, Force of Will. We've seen these cards in a lot of decks that we've talked about. You still see them in decks today, depending on the format. You don't always see Hoodwink.
I like it, though.
It is cool. It's 1 colorless, 1 blue instant. A common from Mercadian Masks. You return target artifact, enchantment, or land to its owner's hand. I believe this is to protect your enchantments from removal or to bounce something your opponent plays that is disruptive to your game plan. Those seems like 2 good reasons to run the deck.
I was thinking maybe mostly for protecting your illusions of grandeur if they try to destroy it after you put it down, maybe. I didn't think that through too well yet, though.
Well, that was my first thought. Protect your key enchantment.
But it's cool because it's so versatile. You can use it as a counter spell to bounce your own permanent, or you can bounce something like high cost that they put down to make them have to cast it again, or maybe get countered the second time they try to cast it.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like it has a protective effect. It protects things you want to protect from removal, but it's also versatile. There's probably plenty of times in the game where you could do something with a Hoodwink if you had it in your hand. At worst case scenario, you pitch it to Force of Will because it's blue. Mm-hmm. And then enchantments. You have 4 Illusions of Grandeur because that's what the deck does. It donates Illusions of Grandeur. And then you have 4 Necroponents, the greatest card draw spell in the game. So that's the core of the deck. I mean, it's very streamlined. You look at it, it's very obvious what it does. You want to play your Illusions of Grandeur and donate as quickly as possible. So you have ramp cards and cards to draw other cards to get those 2 spells. That's it. That's the whole deck. And it frequently kills, within 3 turns. Everything works out well for you. The sideboard is full of more removal and counter magic if needed. So you have your Annuls, which counters target artifact or enchantment spell. You have a couple more Contagion if you're facing a horde deck and you need to deal with their hordes quickly. 3 Hydroblasts, 2 more Unmasks. I shouldn't say 2 more Unmasks. You didn't have any Unmasks in the main board, but you have 2 Unmasks in the sideboard, which my guess is you board this in if they're playing a lot of counter magic and your 4 Duress just isn't enough to clear their hand of their counter magic and or removal.
Okay.
And then you have 4 Phyrexian Negator in the sideboard. So it goes from a deck with no creatures, or it has the potential to go from a deck with no creatures to a deck with 4 giant beasts in it. 4 Phyrexian Negators, 3 casting cost, 5/5 trampling horrors. So this is one of them switcheroo sideboards, Alex. They think they're playing one thing. Game 2, you pull a switcheroo, you kill them with a 5/5 that you can ritual out on turn 1.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they've probably boarded all their creature removal out if they have any. because they're like, oh, I'm playing a Trix deck. I don't have anything to do with my Source to Plowshares. I've never actually played a sideboard like that, where my sideboard is like an alternative,
Yeah, neither have
like
I.
completely alternative game plan. I like the idea of it. I'd be curious to hear from people who do that often, who often build like a transformational sideboard of sorts into their decks. So game two can be like an entirely different game plan. I wonder how
Yeah.
often it actually works.
And especially with this deck, I wonder what exactly, like if he like did that every time, like every match he did that at some point, or if the Phyrexian Negator was more for like when they don't have damage-based removal,
Yeah.
like they're playing, creatureless or with like removal spells that are only like non-damage based,
Yeah.
you know. And
Definitely
plus,
don't bring it in during burn.
oh,
Yeah. So what'd you say?
and plus, like you said, then they take them out anyways. So,
Yeah. But that's the whole deck. Piloted by Scott McCord, GP Philadelphia 2000. The second Trix deck that made the top 8 is Necro Donate, called Necro Donate, but it's still a Trix deck. You can see Trix, that's exactly what it is, Necro and Donate. Necro to draw the card, Donate to donate the card. The
yeah.
card being Illusions of Grandeur.
If I had like come up with this and someone asked me what I was playing back then, I would have been like, Illusions Donate deck,
Necro of Grandeur. Donate of Illusions. Necro Hoodwinked. Tutor Illusions. Illusions Tutor. I would say Demonic Vault. That's what I would call it. The second deck, piloted by William Jensen, is essentially the same deck. There are very few differences. He puts in one more Vampiric Tutor, one more Hoodwink, one more land, and he removed the Brainstorms and the Contagion. So no Brainstorms, no Contagion.
very similar.
I think this is probably how I would go with the deck, actually. I'd probably just think, why bother with one Contagion? Why bother? Just go full on Trix. Put in a second Hoodwink. Put in an additional Vampiric Tutor instead of the Contagion. But this wasn't even the highest placing deck, so who knows? I don't know. But it's essentially the same deck. So there's only so many ways you can build this deck, because it's designed just to get those 2 cards. So it's just going to be 4 copies of those 2 cards, and then all of the tutors and card draw spells and ramp spells that you can shove
I'm
into
forgetting
there.
how Demonic Consultation works. Could you Vampiric and then Demonic to get like just the top card you just got? Is that helpful?
I don't see why you couldn't. Let me read all of this text again.
No.
So they're both instants. Vampiric Tutor instant. Pay 2 life.
You have to
search your
remove the top 6 cards of your
Oh
library.
yeah, okay, yeah, that's right.
So I was forgetting about that.
Name a card, remove the top 6 cards of your library from the game. You could still do it. You could still Vampiric Tutor for the card you want. Illusions of Grandeur, for instance. Put it on top of your deck, and then cast Demonic Consultation to remove it from the game. You could do that. It's not against the rules. Nobody's stopping you, Alex. That's how you want to play the game. If you really wanted to throw your opponent off, actually, that might be a good move.
But I guess you could Demonic Consultation to try to get one of your pieces, and if it doesn't work,
well, it always works. That's the thing about Demonic Consultation.
I guess, yeah.
You always get the piece.
Yeah, it keeps going.
You could have really bad luck where you flip over all 4 copies of a donate or something to get to illusion. You could name here. That's the thing about Demonic Consultation. That's why it was always scary in the early days, and why I didn't play it as a young teen, because I was like, oh, this could not work out well for me sometimes.
Yes. So I guess the root of my question was, like, with 4 consultations and 4 tutors, can you use them together in any way, or are they just completely separate ways to get to your stuff?
I think they're totally separate ways to get to your stuff.
But I guess, I guess then you use the tutor first, and then you can get one of your combo pieces, and then use the demonic consultation to try to get, the next one.
Yeah.
And you have like slightly better odds or whatever because you're trying to get the card you have more of in your deck still.
It's just like having 4 more tutors, essentially.
Yeah.
This tutor just has a very strange roundabout way of getting you to your card of interest. Remove the top 6 cards of your library from the game. Reveal the next card to all players. If it's the card named, put it into your hand. If not, remove it. Remove that card from the game. Continue revealing. Yes, every once in a while, you're just going to have horrible luck with the demonic consultation. But more often than not, if you've built your deck correctly, it's going to work out.
If you only need
more
2
often.
cards to kill your opponent like every time, then I mean,
Why didn't we see this deck after this GP? I looked around on MTG Top 8. I looked for Trix and like, this is it. 2000, 2001. It did briefly reemerge in a different form, but we're going to leave that for another episode. There's a slightly, it's not slightly, it's a modified version of Trix that showed up after a few key cards were banned. And those key cards, so they were major bannings. I talked about that earlier. That happened soon after this deck did really well at this tournament. Necro, Dark Ritual, Demonic Consultation, they were all banned soon after this tournament, which of course is going to affect the consistency of and the speed of the deck. Yes, you could still play Illusions of Grandeur and Donate, but you don't have ways to find the cards nearly as quickly. You don't have ways to ramp out other spells nearly as quickly.
You said Necro, Demonic, and what else got banned?
In March 2003, and extended, actually more than just the 3 cards I mentioned. In March of 2000, I think I might have said 2003 a second ago. March of 2000, in the extended format, Dark Ritual and Mana Vault were banned.
Oh.
So there goes your ramp.
Okay.
And then in 2001, in March, in extended, Necropotence and Demonic Consultation are banned. So they totally neutered the deck. You're left with Donate and Illusions of Grandeur, and they're like, have fun.
That seems so weird to me. And I don't know what all was going on like in the overall meta at the time, so maybe it makes more sense. But like, based on what Mark Rosewater said, you'd sort of think that they just ban Donate.
Well, I think the problem with Donate, at least from Rosewater's perspective, isn't that it's necessarily a format warping card. It's just that it constrains R&D's ability to develop certain types of cards.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I guess just still looking from that perspective, you'd think that might be more of a target. And I also think Demonic Consultation is probably the most ban-worthy, just from the decks we've seen. And I know Necro was a really big problem at the time, but Demonic Consultation, in my mind, would be kind of like the one I'd look at first.
Yeah.
Dark Ritual seems like a weird card to ban to me.
Dark Ritual, Mana Vault, Necro, Demonic Consultation. So this is all 2000, 2001. You have to remember, we weren't really playing. We had stopped playing by that point. Yeah. And this was a little bit after all sorts of incredibly powerful cards were printed. Mm-hmm. We weren't actually active for Combo Winter and all the things that
this
happened
is just
around that time.
Urza's...
So, like after we started playing, Ramp and Tutors were always good, of course. Mm-hmm. But they definitely became like way more problematic.
Yeah. And some of the, it's how they work together too. Like, Dark Ritual is not as big of a deal in the format if Necro doesn't exist. So,
Yeah. I think that's probably why they started with Dark Ritual. They're like, I don't know what was going through their heads actually, but you look at Dark Ritual and Necro, they're a perfect pairing.
Yeah.
If you have Necro decks dominating all the time, you might think, okay, we could ban Necro. People love playing Necro. What if we just banned the card that allowed them to get Necro out on turn 1 instead? That's the logic that the people who developed the middle school format followed. Like Necro is banned in premodern.
Yeah.
But it's legal in middle school, and what they did is they banned Dark Ritual. So you can build Necro decks in the middle school format, but you can't ramp them out on turn 1 with a Dark Ritual.
Yeah. I tend to think of it the other way around. Not that I know any better, but like to me, it's just, Dark Ritual is such a basic old card.
Yeah.
Necro kind of like came along and shook things up and stuff, I'd sort of looked at banning it first. But
Yeah.
you have to look at the whole picture and see what other cards are available and the whole scenario.
Because when we started playing in the mid 90s, I mean, Dark Ritual was always powerful. But the powerful things you would do with Dark Ritual would be Dark Ritual out of Hypnotic Spectre or something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, unless you had a Jazam Jin, like it wasn't necessarily like a game-breaking card for you to have around.
Yeah, and Spectre could be dealt with also on that same first turn by your opponent with a Swords to Plowshares or a Lightning Bolt. You know,
Mhm.
Jazam was harder to get rid of, but also Jazams were harder to come by. You didn't run into as many Jazam Jins just playing with your 13-year-old friends. But anyways, that's the Trix deck. That's the classic Trix deck. Next week, we're going to talk about the version of the Trix deck that came just after this. And I wanted to present that because I also want to look at some pre-modern Trix decks. Even though some of these
Oh,
cards are banned in pre-modern, like Demonic Consultation and Necro, there are still some people who've tried to put together some Illusions of Grandeur donate decks.
I don't see why not. You still have the two main pieces, and you have plenty of other good cards to
You still have the combo
work
there
with.
for you. And when I was looking at them, they seem to be very similar to, in a lot of ways, the Trix deck that came after Dark Ritual and Necro and Demonic Consultation were banned.
Okay.
Do you have anything else you want to say about Trix, Alex, before we move on to segment two?
I don't think so.
Segment two, okay. We're moving on to segment two. We're going to follow up with the Trix next week. Segment two is the Old Mage Commander Corner. This is the last segment on every episode of the Old Mage MTG podcast. This week on the Commander Corner, we're going to talk about some underappreciated commander cards from Mirage Block. This is an article that I came across on the Card Kingdom blog. 5 underrated commander cards from Mirage, written by Jacob Lackner. He's the guy that runs the Nitzahone Magic YouTube channel, which has been a fantastic resource for somebody like me who played Magic the Gathering in like 94 and then quit around like 98 and then didn't pay any attention in the game for like 25 years and is now trying to get back into it and catch up on all the things we missed. He's been doing this YouTube channel for like a really long time, and he has videos on all sorts of sets, like all the sets. He covers everything.
Okay.
He covers new stuff. He covers old stuff. He covers all the sets that were published or printed, when we were out of the game. So it's been a really great YouTube channel for me to go to learn about all sorts of stuff.
And I don't know if he writes all of these articles, but this is a great series of articles too about the older sets with commander cards. They don't have one yet for every set, every old set, but they've been putting one up every once in a while. And every time they do, I enjoy them.
We'll have to go through a lot of them. In this one from Mirage, he highlights cards from Mirage that are not the tutors. I'm showing the tutors right here: Enlightened Tutor, Mystical Tutor, Worldly Tutor. Everybody already knows these. They get a decent amount of play in Commander. Cards that are not Rampant Growth or the Diamonds, which again also get play in Commander. He's picking some more spicy cards, some cards that he thinks the kids these days need to know about, the cards that the kids don't play enough of.
The Forgotten Spice.
And his first pick is a spicy one, I think. He calls it out as an underrated commander. This is Hakeem Loreweaver.
I've been too afraid to try this card.
It's a card I've looked at many times and then just moved on. But it is interesting. So Hakeem is a legend, 3 colorless, 2 blue, 2/4 flying. You can pay 2 blue, and if you do, put target creature enchantment card from your graveyard on Hakeem Loreweaver. Treat that enchantment as though it were just played. Use this ability only during your upkeep and only if there are no enchantments on Hakeem. You could also pay 2 blue and tap Hakeem to destroy all enchantments on him. So he has this unique ability where you can take enchantments from the graveyard, strap them on him.
I like that.
If another great enchantment shows up in the graveyard, you can destroy the one that's already on him and then strap that to him.
Or
So
if
like
your opponent puts a negative enchantment on him, like a harmful enchantment.
that is also true.
Unfortunately, most of the ones that I can think of involve tapping the creature or keeping them tapped, and then you wouldn't be able to tap him to remove the enchantment, you know?
It's not going to work against the paralyzed. Yeah.
Yeah. Does pacifism tap them?
I don't think so. I think
It just
pacifism
prevents
just
them
says it
from
can't
attacking?
attack or block.
Okay. Okay, so get rid of pacifism.
Look it up and confirm that, but I believe
Yeah,
that's the
can't
case.
attack or block with pacifism.
So this is something that's always looked interesting to me, but it's just not worth building around because he can only return the enchantment to himself. And I just can't think of that many enchantments that are powerful enough for me to like have this guy as my commander.
See, I
He
mean,
also
I
doesn't need
like
to
that
be your
ability.
commander.
Sorry, go ahead.
He doesn't need to be your commander. Like you could just put him in a blue deck. He could just be there as a legend. But yeah, as a
Yeah.
commander, he calls him out as an underrated commander. You like that ability.
Well, I like the bit, like we've talked about a bunch of times, you know, combining auras with creatures makes them both targetable simultaneously. Uh, so this gives you something to do where you can recycle your enchantments from the graveyard if they get destroyed, or you know, you put an enchantment on one of your other creatures, it gets killed. Now you can bring it back, put it on there.
Mm-hmm.
He flies too, so if you're using any kind of enchantments, you know, like curiosity or something that do things when they get through attacking for you, you know, it'd be nice to use with things like that.
It is a good ability. I'm not going to pretend like it's bad.
Yeah,
It turns every enchantment into almost a rancor.
yeah,
If
yeah.
you're thinking a rancor like ability, you have to have a creature. You have to keep him around to do it, and you have to
What
pay
I
2 blue
don't,
instead of 1 green. But you know, it's close enough. You can get
yeah,
continued uses out of it.
what I don't like, I guess, is the casting cost. But then at the same time, I think about it, and I guess if his casting cost were much lower, he'd probably be like really strong, right? I
He
don't know.
wouldn't be too good. I mean, he was not like he'd be compared to what else is out there, even from that time. It wouldn't be insane or
Yeah, I think
anything.
it'd still be fair if it was blue too.
It would be. But you know, I can't think of all that many great enchantments that I would want to strap on Hakeem. Enchantments that I want to strap on Hakeem enough to even run Hakeem in my commander decks. But what I really like about this series of articles that this guy wrote is it introduces me to all sorts of modern frame cards that I don't know about
Mhm.
that you can pair with these order cards.
Yeah.
So I can't think of any super, powerful enchantments that would make me want to run Hakeem, but they do exist. He points out a few, including Eldrazi Conscription and Octopus Umbra. So no enchantments like this exist in old frame Magic, which is what I'm familiar with. Eldrazi Conscription is 8 colorless, a tribal enchantment, an Eldrazi aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +10/+10 and it has trample and annihilator too.
Yep.
Octopus Umbra, 3 colorless, 2 blue, enchant creature. Enchanted creature has base power and toughness 8/8 and has whenever this creature attacks, you may tap target creature with power 8 or less. It also has totem armor, which means if enchanted creature would be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this aura.
Oh, well, that's cool. That's a super
So,
good ability with him.
so you have a couple enchantments that turn Hakeem into a major attacking threat, like
Mhm.
something that needs to be dealt with immediately, especially if you're running him as a commander, because then you're dealing with commander damage, right? And if you
True.
strap a
Good point.
10/10 onto a 2/4, you just need 2 attacks.
And the Octopus Umbra, I especially like because with his ability, you know, it kind of gives him a second life, and then he can bring the Octopus Umbra back. Makes him a lot harder to destroy.
Yeah. So you got a couple modern enchantments that, make him, like I said, a major attacking threat. He also points out a couple other enchantments that have enter the battlefield effects that can turn him into a card draw engine. You
Cool.
mentioned, strapping a curiosity onto him, and since he has flying, evasion, you can, get card draw from the curiosity. But there's also stuff like this in modern Magic: Rousing Reed, 2 colorless, 1 blue, enchantment aura. When Rousing Reed enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards, then discard a card.
Nice.
Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has flying. Flight of Fancy, 3 colorless, 1 blue. Enchant creature. When Flight of Fancy enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards. Enchanted creature has flying. So you remember not only can you bring an enchantment from your graveyard back to the battlefield onto Hakeem, you can also pay 2 and tap Hakeem to send the enchantment back to the graveyard, and then you can just keep repeating this to use enchantments like this to draw cards repeatedly with Hakeem.
Yeah, that's cool.
There are also cards that you can run that allow you to move auras around, so they're not limited to Hakeem, but that becomes harder to pull off. You know, one of the I was going to say downsides. It's not a downside necessarily. It's a limitation of Hakeem is you can only use his ability to bring an enchantment back from the graveyard onto him. You can't, just put it on any other creature you have.
Yeah.
But if you want to get a little more roundabout, you can also play cards like these blue cards he points out, Mind Control and Aura Finesse. Aura Finesse in particular is an instant for 1 blue, attach target aura you control to target creature, draw a card, so you can strap the enchantment on Hakeem and cast an Aura Finesse and move it around to some other target creature.
Okay.
Anywho, that's Hakeem. I mean, just some modern cards you can run with Hakeem that I didn't know about until I read this article. Second underrated card from Mirage that he points out is Early Harvest. Early Harvest is 1 colorless, 2 green instant. Target player untaps all basic lands he or she controls. This first printing of this card is in Mirage. It's also been printed in 6th edition, 7th edition, and 9th edition. Rating of 3.875 on Gatherer, current market price of $1.68. I forgot to mention Hakeem is a reserve list card. 3.219 on Gatherer, current market price of 89 cents. So these are cheap cards. He highlights Early Harvest as an overlooked ramp card. You can use Early Harvest to turn 6 mana into 9. I think 5 into 7, if I'm doing that math right. But let's just say 6 into 9, because that is right. So that raises the ceilings of the casting costs that you can typically handle if you have Early Harvest in your deck too. He points to several cards in the modern card pool that make it way better than just an average ramp spell, however. There are a couple creatures he points out here. There might be lots more with effects like this, but these are the 2 that he highlighted. Creatures like Vorinclex, Voice of Hunger, and Nyxbloom Ancient amplify the mana you receive when you tap your land, so you can get even more out of the Early Harvest. Instead of just turning 6 mana into 9, if you have these out, you get even more out of it. So Vorinclex is 6 colorless, 2 green, 7/6 legendary creature, Praetor. Trample. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. So you can double up the mana when you tap your lands. Whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. That sucks for your opponent. Nyxbloom Ancient, 4 colorless, 3 green, 5/5 enchantment creature elemental. Has trample. If you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. So now you got somebody that doubles your mana, somebody that triples your mana. Get even more out of your Early Harvest. And yes, you can only use it to untap basic land, so that's a limitation to it. Combine it with other cards that also love having basic lands around, and you'll be fine. So he points out some modern cards that love basic lands. They synergize with basic lands specifically. There's Titania, Nature's Force. 4 colors, 2 green, 6/6 legendary creature elemental. You may play forest from your graveyard. Whenever a forest enters the battlefield under your control, create a 5/3 green elemental creature token. Whenever an elemental you control dies, you may mill 3 cards.
That's pretty cool.
It's insane, yeah. And there's Karametra, God of Harvest, 3 colorless, 1 green, 1 white, 6/7 legendary enchantment creature god. These modern cards, they take a lot out of me when I'm reading them. There's just a lot to read.
You have to take a deep breath.
I know. Every card is like reading Demonic Consultation. Indestructible. As long as your devotion to green and white is less than 7, Karametra isn't a creature. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you may search your library for a forest or plains card, put it into the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So it's not like these first two I mentioned, Vorinclex and Nyxbloom, they work really nicely with early harvest because they amplify the beneficial effect of early harvest by amplifying your mana. These two, they don't really work with early harvest necessarily. He's just pointing out the fact that you could build decks with just basic lands.
They work with basic lands.
Basic lands, yeah. They're all things to throw into a basic land deck, essentially.
Yeah.
Because you may think, oh, I'm playing Commander. There's so many powerful non-basic lands. Do I want to put basic lands in my deck just so I can get the benefit of early harvest? Well, there's all sorts of cards that work really well with basic lands. So the answer is, yeah, sometimes you do just want to build a basic land deck, which I didn't really know about any cards like this. In my mind, I'm from an era of Magic. Alex, you're also from that era, where sometimes I think I want to play basic lands or I want to play few non-basics because I'm worried about things like Wasteland or I'm worried about Blood Moon, stuff like that. I can't think of cards that like synergize or work really well with basic lands that would incentivize you to build a basic land deck.
Yeah, not a whole lot. A lot of them are tutor type cards. Like green has a lot of cards where you can pull like basic lands from your deck.
Yeah.
Even
those I just use primarily for mana fixing and like
yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's kind of and then like Tithe, basic planes, not basic planes, just planes.
Planes, and I use those to get duels.
Yeah. So yeah, I see what you mean.
Land tax.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta get your basics with land tax. But anyways, that's early harvest. The third one he highlights is one we talked about a couple episodes ago. Shallow Grave. It's 1 colorless, 1 black instant. Put the top creature card from your graveyard into play as though it were just played. That creature is unaffected by summoning sickness. Remove the creature from the game at end of any turn. This is a reserveless card from Mirage. Gather rating at 4.323. Current market price of $49.25. I wish it wasn't so expensive. He points out the limitations of this spell. We've talked about those limitations too. They're very obvious. They're stated right here on the card. Has to be the top creature card in your graveyard, and you only get to do its thing for 1 turn. Then you have to remove it from the game. But he rightly highlights the fact that it is an instant. And he points out a couple nasty cards with enter the graveyard triggers that are normally hard to reanimate. However, Shallow Grave can be cast in response to their enter the battlefield triggers. Did I say enter the graveyard triggers? Let me read this again.
Yeah, graveyard.
Yeah, graveyard. Okay. Here's what I screwed up. Shallow Grave can be cast in response to their enter the graveyard triggers. That's what I meant to say. So one is Kozilek, Butcher of Truth. Sounds mean. He's an Eldrazi. It's 10 colorless, 12/12, legendary Eldrazi. When you cast this spell, draw 4 cards. Has Annihilator 4. When Kozilek, Butcher of Truth is put into a graveyard from anywhere, so that includes your hand, its owner shuffles their graveyard into their library. So the way this card is written up, it's like normally you couldn't just discard him into your graveyard and reanimate him with any traditional reanimation spell, because he goes to their graveyard and you have to shuffle your graveyard back into your library. He's going to end up in your library somewhere. But with an instant like Shallow Grave, you can discard Kozilek, and in response to this graveyard trigger, which would normally cause you to reshuffle them back into your library, you cast Shallow Grave and you attack with them for 12.
Man. See, to me, that never would have occurred to me, because I would just have assumed that effect like is not, you can't respond to it, you know, that it just like,
It's a triggered effect. It's a great
yeah,
enter the
yeah.
graveyard trigger, uh, which you can respond to with an instant on the
All
stack.
right.
So according to what I'm reading, and I that's how I understand it too. When I look at what he wrote, it seems to make sense to me. There's also World Spine Worm, 8 colorless, 3 green, 15/15, trampling worm. When World Spine Worm dies, put 3/5/5 green worm creature tokens with trample onto the battlefield. When World Spine Worm is put into a graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into its owner's library. So again, World Spine Worm dies, creates 3/5/5 green trampling tokens. When he enters the graveyard, in response to the shuffle into your library trigger, cast Shallow Grave and you attack with him for 15.
All right.
So there are some huge bodies you can use in Modern Magic with Shallow Grave. I don't know when Enter the Graveyard triggers started. I'm trying to think of any Enter the Graveyard, any creatures with Enter the Graveyard triggers from Old Frame Magic. There might be
No.
something. I'm
I
just
mean,
not thinking.
yeah, there probably are that we're not thinking of.
I'm just
I'm,
not thinking.
it's hard to separate it from like something that says dies, you know. Some cards say die, and some cards say, older cards say is killed, I think, right?
I don't think there's anything like that, at least pre-Weatherlight, because Weatherlight, if you remember, was a bit of a Graveyard Matter set, even though that's not the memory I have of it at all. I don't remember Weatherlight having much to do with the graveyard, but it was a theme of that set, and it did have Buried Alive in it. But I'm bringing it up because it also had Gaia's Blessing, and that was the first card that I remember
Yeah.
that allowed you to shuffle your graveyard back into your library, other than Felden's Cane,
Okay.
which
I
which
thought
you
you
had
were
to
going to say
cast and
that.
then crack.
Yeah, yeah.
But that was like anti-Miltech, Gaia's Blessing.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I thought you were going to say. Yeah.
So Felden's Cane, that's different. That was the effect of a spell that you played, then it allowed you to reshuffle. But it wasn't like when this enters your graveyard, then reshuffle everything back.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't think of any enter the graveyard triggers prior to Guy's Blessing. And that's not a creature that triggers anything when it enters the graveyard.
Yeah.
But anyways, Kozilek, Butcher of Truth, World Spine Worm, two really kick-ass targets for a Shallow Grave. He moves on to Phyrexian Purge, which is 2 colorless, 1 black, 1 red sorcery. Pay 3 life per target, destroy any number of target creatures. This is another reserve list card from Mirage. Mirage has a lot of reserve list cards. 3.978 on Gather, current market price $2.46. I've also always stayed away from this card because the combination of the casting cost and the life cost always seemed too high to me. It's like, okay, if it was a lower casting cost and the pay 3 life per target, maybe I could get behind it. If it was this casting cost but pay 1 life per target, I could get behind it. I've just never saw the value there for those combinations of costs. He describes the card as a one-sided wrath. I think to myself, but for how much life? Like, how much life are you going to have to pay to one-side wrath people? Even in Commander, starting with 40 life, it seems like a
Yeah.
very steep cost to me. What I didn't know about until now are some modern cards that turn paying life into an upside.
Nice. Okay.
So I see stuff like this actually, and my mind always goes to Mirror Universe because that's the kick-ass old card where you would want to drain your own life and then switch it around. But there's other stuff that, you pay the life and that works to your benefit in other ways. He points out 2 creatures. Run is Rowan Scion of War, 1 colorless, 1 black, 1 red. 4/2, legendary creature, human wizard with menace. You tap them, and then spells you cast this turn that are black and or red cost X less to cast, where X is the amount of life you lost this turn. activate only as a sorcery.
Okay, cool.
Greven Predator Captain. 3 colorless, 1 black, 1 red, 5/5 legendary creature human warrior with menace. Greven gets +X/+0, where X is the amount of life you've lost this turn. Whenever Greven attacks, you may sacrifice another creature. If you do, you draw cards equal to that creature's power, and you lose life equal to that creature's toughness. But these are all cards that, in the case of Rowan, you pay the life to clear their creatures out with Phyrexian Purge. And then if you have Rowan on the battlefield, you tap Rowan, you could feed all of that life into some spell, like, for instance, what is it? There's Drain Life is black mana, but there are X spells.
Yes, there's more than one. Yeah, use some X spells in black that do something similar.
An X spell, let's say, pick an X spell in black where you don't have to pay black to cast it. You can feed the X colorless into it.
Or do a red spell with X.
Or a red spell. Let's go easier. Fireball, Care-Vex Torch. Right? You pay the life. You can immediately do the same amount of damage to your opponent if you have Rowan in play. You clear out 3 of their creatures, pay 9 life. You now have 9X that you can feed into an X spell. In the case of Greven, you can give him +9/+0. An attack for 14, for instance. So using the life cost as a benefit in combination with some other modern cards. Not something that I thought about when I saw Phyrexian Purge or when I've looked at Phyrexian Purge.
Yeah.
Because cards like Rowan, cards like Greven don't exist in the formats that I'm familiar with, the formats that I play typically. And then finally, he mentions a card that I think is underrated also. It is Cadaverous Bloom. 3 colorless, 1 black, 1 green. Enchantment. Choose a card in your hand and remove it from the game. Add 2 black or 2 green to your mana pool. Play this ability as a mana source. Another reserve list card from Mirage, 4.375 on Gather at current market price of $5.44. Is this card cheap for its ability, Alex? It might be. Should it be more expensive? Maybe. Am I saying that because I have a Cadaverous Bloom position sitting in a box over there, so I want it to spike up in price? The answer is no. I only have 4, and it's because I want to build a Prosbloom deck. I don't hoard Cadaverous Blooms. But this has the potential to provide huge amounts of mana that can be funneled into all sorts of X spells. We know that from the Prosbloom deck where it was funneled into Prosperity and Drain Life. He highlights some modern spells that are even better mana dumps, Alex. There are even better things that you can do with the mana you generate from Cadaverous Bloom. 2 he highlights are Exsanguinate and Death to the Deathless. So you find some way to draw a bunch of cards. Let's say with Prosperity, you could still do that way. Pitch them to the Bloom to generate a bunch of mana. You can Exsanguinate your opponents. It's 2 black X sorcery. Each opponent loses X life. You gain life equal to the X lost that way. I was trying to think just a moment ago about some black X spells that you funnel colorless mana into. Here it is right here, Alex. Right here. And it's perfect for Commander because it gets every opponent.
Yeah. Just for 2 black in addition to the X. That's crazy. Yeah.
All that life. This card is crazy. Then he also points to Death. No. Dep.
Debt.
No. Jesus. Dip to the Deathless. That's 2 black, 2 white, X. Debt to the Deathless. Jeez Louise, I did it right that time. Is a sorcery. Each opponent loses 2 times X life. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. So these are brutal X spells that hit all your opponents and give you life. so much more satisfying to funnel mana generated with via Cadaverous Bloom into these cards
Yeah.
compared to Drain Life. And, it was already fun to
Yeah.
funnel it into Drain Life. Now it's even more fun. But that's it. Those are the cards that he highlighted from Mirage that he believes are underplayed in Commander. They're all cards that I like, and I really like this article because it's teaching me about modern Magic. And it's not only teaching me about modern Magic, it's showing me the cards that I love already from old frame Magic and pointing me towards modern cards that I could combine them with.
Hoping you dip your toe in.
I'm dipping my toes into modern Magic.
Dipped of the toes.
With Nitsa Hone's underrated old frame Commander card series.
Cool.
Okay, but that's it. That's it, Alex.
That's
I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to say about any of these underrated Commander cards from Mirage.
I don't think so.
Anything that you wanted to say about Trix? Anything that you want to say to the people in general before we
I think
head
I said
out?
it all.
I think I said it all too. And actually, my throat hurts right now because I feel like I did a lot of talking trying to read all those modern cards.
My throat hurt before the
Just kept
podcast, but I didn't talk much, so I'm okay
Ooh,
still.
Alex, do you got the COVID?
No.
Did you test?
No. I choked on some water earlier before the podcast, and I coughed a whole bunch.
You herniated your throat with
I might have.
water.
Yeah.
That's rough.
You can have a esophageal hernia.
I know it's no joke, man. We're at the age now too where you could just herniate anything for no reason.
Anytime.
You just move wrong, you herniate something, a disc, something in your abdomen, your throat, herniated eyeball. I knew a guy who herniated his eyeball once.
Really? I was going to say that as a joke. I didn't think that was a real thing. Wow.
I made it up, but now I don't believe you can herniate an eyeball, but I'm going to Google it right now. Can you
can't.
herniate?
No, there's no way. No.
Herniate an
You
eyeball.
can pop it out though. You get your eyeball popped out.
Herniation of the anterior lens capsule.
Okay, there you go.
So post-traumatic herniation of eyeball, a rare case. This is a case study written in 2016 by S.P. Guffey, published in the Medical Journal of Dr. D.Y. Patil Vidyapith, which sounds like a fake as fuck medical journal. How's there a medical journal of Dr. D.Y. Patil Vidyapith? I don't know
out of his garage.
Yeah. I've never seen such a thing before. I am aware of some journals that are basically just journals for certain unethical professors to just funnel like 50 to 100 publications a year out onto PubMed, and a lot of the work is garbage. But I've never, at least he's upfront about this. He literally, at least he, I want to give the guy some credit. At least he names a journal after himself, so people can actually spot that it's ridiculous.
True.
Instead of trying to give it some fancy sounding name. You can also herniate your orbital fat. iWiki has a whole section on orbital fat prolapses.
Whoa.
In other rare situations, the orbital fat can herniate posteriorly through the superior orbital fissure, mostly in thyroid eye disease.
Oh, okay. Learn something new every day.
You ever see that lady she was popular on like the late night shows a long time ago? She popped her eyeballs out. You know what I'm talking about? She was like famous.
I think so.
Haven't seen her for a long time. I wonder what happened, Alex. Could be an orbital fat prolapse. That's my guess, because I think she had thyroid issues. But anyways, that's the end of episode 94 of the Old Mage MTG podcast. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcast. Give us a thumbs up. Leave a comment somewhere, maybe a kind comment. I like getting comments. If it's not a kind comment, I just ignore it. But if it's a kind comment, I will like it back. I will say something kind back to you. Is there anything you want to say to people before we leave, Alex? No.
Thanks for tuning in.
Nothing. Okay. Talk to you next week.
I ain't gonna do this anymore. That's all for me. Goodbye.